Hollywood loves to dangle the golden statue, but sometimes chasing Oscars leads to embarrassing crashes. You've seen it before. The big speeches, the swelling music, the serious actors giving their all in movies designed to scream awards glory. But what happens when audiences don't buy it? When prestige turns into pretension, and the box office gives a brutal reality check. Stay tuned, because the next 15 films prove that Oscar bait can sink faster than a stone. Collateral Beauty, 2016. Sometimes, a movie is so desperate for prestige, it feels like a parody of Oscar bait. Collateral Beauty fits that bill. On paper, it looked like awards catnip. Will Smith as a grieving father, plus a star-studded supporting cast with Kate Winslet, Edward Norton, and Helen Mirren. The story. Smith's character writes letters to abstract concepts like love, time, and death. And magically, those concepts appear to him as living people. Sounds profound, right? Wrong. Audiences smelled the manipulation instantly. The film's marketing sold it as an uplifting drama about grief and healing, but critics slammed it as emotionally dishonest. Worse, it pulled a bait-and-switch. The mystical beings weren't actually real. They were struggling actors hired by Smith's co-workers to stage an intervention. Instead of tear-jerking, it came across as cruel and bizarre. Reviews shredded it, with some calling it a Hallmark movie on steroids. At the box office, it was dead on arrival. With a budget of around $36 million, Collateral Beauty grossed only about $88 million worldwide, barely covering costs once marketing was factored in. It became a punchline, cited as the kind of prestige project that mistakes sentimentality for depth. For Will Smith, who was chasing another serious role after The Pursuit of Happiness, this was an ugly detour. In the end, Collateral Beauty wasn't beautiful or profound. It was a prime example of how Hollywood sometimes confuses weirdly sentimental with award-worthy. 7 Pounds, 2008. If Collateral Beauty was a misstep, 7 Pounds was the blueprint. Will Smith again tried to transform raw melodrama into Oscar gold, but the result was a confusing, heavy-handed mess that baffled audiences. The premise followed Smith as a guilt-ridden man on a secret mission to change 7 strangers' lives. It should have been moving. Instead, it felt like an endless mystery box that left viewers frustrated rather than inspired. Directed by Gabriele Muccino, who had earlier guided Smith to acclaim in The Pursuit of Happiness, this project doubled down on syrupy emotions and tragic gravitas. Every frame seemed engineered to tug at tears, yet the storytelling was so opaque that audiences were left scratching their heads. The narrative unfolded with cryptic flashbacks and half-explanations until the big reveal, which critics derided as melodramatic and manipulative. The press skewered the film. Reviewers called it sanctimonious and accused it of confusing sadness with substance. Roger Ebert himself declared it one of the worst films of the year. Even Smith's charisma couldn't save it. Instead of boosting his Oscar chances, the movie made him look like he was trying way too hard to be taken seriously. Financially, it was underwhelming. With a budget reported around $55 million, 7 Pounds pulled in about $169 million worldwide. While not a total wipeout, it was a disappointment considering Smith's blockbuster pedigree and the award's expectations pinned on it. Studios had hoped for acclaim, but the Academy largely ignored it. Ultimately, 7 Pounds proved that just because a story is sad doesn't mean it's profound. Smith's effort was sincere, but sincerity isn't enough when the movie itself collapses under its own melodramatic weight. The Goldfinch, 2019. Adapted from Donna Tartt's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Goldfinch was supposed to be a slam dunk. The book had prestige. The cast boasted names like Nicole Kidman, Sarah Paulson, and Ansel Elgort, and the production budget topped $45 million. Warner Brothers positioned it as awards bait, giving it a September release date designed to catch Oscar buzz. Instead, it turned into one of the biggest critical and financial disasters of the decade. The problem? Nearly everything. The novel's sprawling, decades-long story simply didn't translate well to screen. Directed by John Crowley, who had scored a critical hit with Brooklyn, the film was weighed down by bloated storytelling and a muddled tone. What worked as layered introspection on the page became disjointed and hollow on film. Critics called it boring, self-important, and emotionally inert. The box office numbers were catastrophic. In its opening weekend, The Goldfinch earned a pitiful $2.6 million. Worldwide, it barely scraped $10 million, meaning the studio lost tens of millions. Trade outlets labeled it an epic bomb, and it quickly disappeared from theaters. Awards buzz died immediately, with no major nominations to show for all the hype. Even the cast seemed embarrassed afterward. Ansel Elgort admitted that the adaptation just didn't capture the magic of the novel, while critics joked that the bird painting at the center of the story had more life than the characters. For Warner Brothers, this was a painful reminder. Not every best-selling novel makes for a prestige film. The Goldfinch proved that Oscar bait without heart is just an expensive turkey. All the King's Men, 2006. Political dramas can be Oscar gold, but All the King's Men turned into Oscar Fool's Gold. A remake of the 1949 classic, which itself had won Best Picture, this 2006 version had everything going for it on paper. Sean Penn, Jude Law, Kate Winslet, Anthony Hopkins, and James Gandolfini filled out the cast. The subject matter, a corrupt Louisiana governor loosely inspired by Huey Long, screamed prestige. But what audiences got instead was a dreary, self-serious slog. Directed by Steven Zaillian, a respected screenwriter who penned Schindler's List, the film stumbled under its own weight. The performances were overwrought, the pacing sluggish, and the script muddled. Instead of sharp political commentary, it delivered endless speechifying that left viewers exhausted. Critics panned it, saying it stripped away the gritty energy of the original and replaced it with empty grandstanding. Financially, it was a bust. With a reported budget of $55 million, All the King's Men grossed just $9 million worldwide. That's not a flop. That's a train wreck. All the awards' ambitions evaporated, and the film became a cautionary tale about remaking classics. Even the actors seemed lost in the material. Sean Penn, usually magnetic, delivered a performance so hammy that reviewers compared it to caricature. Instead of an electrifying rise and fall story, the film felt like a parody of serious Oscar contenders. In the end, All the King's Men proved you can't simply dust off an award-winning story, stack the cast with talent, and expect the Academy to bite. Prestige requires more than good intentions. It requires a good movie. 2009. Rob Marshall had struck gold with Chicago, a glitzy musical that danced its way to the Best Picture Oscar. So when he announced 9, expectations skyrocketed. With a cast that included Daniel Day-Lewis, Penelope Cruz, Nicole Kidman, Marion Cotillard, Judi Dench, Kate Hudson, and Sophia Loren, this was supposed to be a musical juggernaut. Instead, it became a bloated, joyless disaster that audiences fled from in droves. Based on the Broadway musical, which itself was inspired by Federico Fellini's 8½, the film told the story of a tormented Italian filmmaker juggling women, fame, and creative crises. On stage, the story had style. On screen, it turned into an incoherent spectacle, weighed down by endless musical numbers that lacked energy. Critics noted the irony, a film about creative brilliance that felt utterly uninspired. Despite the A-list cast, the film failed to generate chemistry. Daniel Day-Lewis, usually unstoppable, seemed uncomfortable and miscast as the lead. The women, though glamorous, were reduced to one-note archetypes orbiting his misery. What should have been dazzling felt hollow. The box office flop was brutal. With a budget near $80 million, 9 made only about $54 million worldwide. The studio had bet on another Chicago, But what they got was a cautionary tale in overstuffed casting and misguided ambition. Awards-wise, it earned a handful of technical nominations, but none of the top prizes it craved. In hindsight, Nine is remembered not as an Oscar contender, but as a reminder that lightning rarely strikes twice. Sometimes, even the brightest stars can't save a movie that has no rhythm. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, 2011. Few films arrived with more obvious Oscar intentions than Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Based on Jonathan Safran Foer's acclaimed novel, it centered on a young boy navigating grief after his father dies in the September 11th attacks. The cast featured Tom Hanks, Sandra Bullock, and newcomer Thomas Horn. With Stephen Daldry directing, a filmmaker who already had 3 Oscar nominations under his belt, this looked like guaranteed award season material. But once audiences actually saw it, the reaction was polarizing. Critics accused the film of exploiting tragedy, saying it leaned too heavily on 9/11 imagery without offering real insight. The emotional beats felt forced, with some reviewers describing the movie as manipulative and cloying. The young lead's hyperactive narration and constant monologues grated on many viewers, leaving the film feeling more exhausting than inspiring. Still, the Academy gave it a surprise Best Picture nomination, proving that Oscar bait sometimes works on voters, even when audiences reject it. Box office returns, however, told the real story. Made for around $40 million, the film grossed only about $55 million domestically, with international numbers doing little to save it. For a prestige project marketed as must-see drama, those were disappointing results. The legacy of Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close is strange. It's remembered less as a heartfelt tribute to resilience, and more as a case study in how Hollywood mishandles sensitive subjects. Aiming for tear-jerking gravitas, it instead came across as tone-deaf and exhausting. The Road, 2009. Cormac McCarthy's Pulitzer-winning novel, The Road, was hailed as one of the bleakest but most powerful works of modern fiction. Adapting it to film seemed like a natural Oscar play. With Viggo Mortensen in the lead, Charlize Theron in a supporting role, and John Hillcoat directing, expectations soared. A post-apocalyptic story of a father and son trudging through desolate wastelands should have delivered heartbreaking prestige cinema. Instead, audiences found it unrelentingly grim and commercially unviable. Visually, the film captured the novel's gray, ash-filled world, but that authenticity worked against it. Critics praised Mortensen's performance, but the film's tone was so relentlessly hopeless that many viewers struggled to sit through it. Even fans of the book admitted the adaptation drained away the fragile glimmers of hope that gave the novel balance. Reviews were mixed, with some calling it a haunting meditation and others labeling it a dreary endurance test. For award season, the film barely made a dent, receiving little recognition outside smaller critics' circles. Box office numbers were no kinder. On a modest $25 million budget, The Road scraped together just $27 million worldwide, a dismal result for a film once touted as a serious contender. Instead of Oscar glory, The Road became a symbol of how grim prestige projects can backfire. The ambition was clear, but audiences simply didn't want to pay to be dragged through 2 hours of cinematic despair. Amelia, 2009. Hilary Swank already had 2 Oscars to her name when she signed on to play aviator Amelia Earhart, and the project seemed destined for award success. A biopic about one of America's most iconic figures, directed by Mira Nair, and co-starring Richard Gere and Ewan McGregor. On paper, it checked every box for prestige filmmaking. But when Amelia hit theaters, it crashed harder than Earhart's ill-fated final flight. The main problem was the lifeless execution. Despite Swank's uncanny resemblance to Earhart, her performance was wooden and oddly restrained. Critics complained the film turned a trailblazing, adventurous woman into a bland, one-dimensional figure. Instead of celebrating her daring spirit, the script reduced her to cliché dialogue and melodramatic romantic subplots. Reviews were brutal, with most pointing out how boring the film was. Audiences stayed away, and the numbers reflected it. Amelia cost around $40 million to make and earned just $19 million worldwide. A biopic meant to soar instead became one of the year's most mocked prestige flops. Swank, who once looked like an award season fixture, saw her Oscar bait streak cool dramatically after this failure. For Nair, a respected director, the film also marked a low point. Biopics can elevate an actor's career when done right, but Amelia became a cautionary tale about how chasing awards doesn't guarantee quality. The Soloist, 2009, pairing Robert Downey Jr. and Jamie Foxx in a gritty drama based on a true story, should have been foolproof. The Soloist told the story of Nathaniel Ayers, a gifted musician struggling with mental illness, and the journalist who befriends him. With Joe Wright directing and a release date originally scheduled for prime Oscar season, this looked like a surefire contender. But the studio grew nervous. After test screenings, Paramount delayed the release, pushing it out of awards contention and signaling trouble. When it finally hit theaters in April 2009, critics and audiences confirmed the worst. The film was muddled, overly sentimental, and strangely flat. What should have been an inspiring friendship story turned into a meandering lecture about redemption. Jamie Foxx gave a committed performance, but critics noted the film veered dangerously into cliché. Downey's role as the hardened journalist also felt underwritten, giving the movie an uneven tone. Instead of striking emotional chords, it stumbled into preachy territory. Financially, it was a letdown. With a budget of about $60 million, it grossed only $38 million worldwide. For a star-driven drama aimed at awards, those numbers were disastrous. The Soloist is remembered today as a wasted opportunity. It had talent, budget, and a true story that could have resonated, but the execution turned it into yet another example of Oscar bait gone bad. Unbroken, 2014. When Angelina Jolie stepped behind the camera to direct Unbroken, Hollywood was buzzing. Adapted from Laura Hillenbrand's best-selling biography of World War II, hero Louis Zamperini, the project looked like an Oscar dream: survival at sea, prisoner of war camps, resilience against impossible odds. With the Coen brothers even working on the script, it seemed unstoppable. But while the story was incredible, the film itself felt oddly hollow. Reviews pointed out that Jolie's direction leaned on safe, conventional choices. Instead of immersing viewers in Zamperini's harrowing ordeal, the film played like a sanitized, overly polished version of a far more brutal story. Critics admired the true tale, but felt the film failed to capture its depth and intensity. Oscar voters were lukewarm. Though it snagged a few technical nominations, it missed out on Best Picture and Best Director, the very awards it had been built for. Financially, the results were underwhelming compared to the hype. The budget was $65 million, and while it made around $163 million worldwide, the studio had expected a cultural event on the level of Saving Private Ryan. Instead, audiences largely forgot it. Jolie's ambitions as a director were clear, but Unbroken showed that prestige packaging doesn't guarantee impact. The real story of Zamperini remained inspiring, but the film adaptation felt like a glossy version of something that should have been raw and unforgettable. Lion, 2016. At first glance, Lion looked like the kind of heart-tugging story that the Academy devours. Adapted from Saru Brierley's memoir, it follows a young Indian boy separated from his family who, years later as an adult living in Australia, uses Google Earth to find his way home. With Dev Patel, Nicole Kidman, and Rooney Mara in starring roles, the film screamed prestige. And while it did earn Oscar nominations, its financial story was far less golden. Critics generally liked the film's emotional arc, especially Patel's earnest performance and Kidman's quiet strength. But many pointed out that the pacing dragged, with the first act absorbing all the emotional energy, while the second half leaned heavily on melodrama. For a story meant to be uplifting, it often felt manufactured in its sentimentality. Awards voters gave it 6 nominations, including Best Picture, but no wins. The nominations brought buzz, but the box office failed to reflect that hype. With a $12 million budget and worldwide grosses around $140 million, it technically made money. But the film's expensive Oscar campaign wiped out much of the profit. For Weinstein Company, which banked on it as a prestige powerhouse, the returns were disappointing. Today, Lion is remembered more for its awards buzz than for lasting cultural impact. It didn't crash as badly as some Oscar bait titles, but it stands as another example of a film where studios chased golden glory harder than audience interest. The Promise, 2016. Big-budget historical epics often feel like Oscar bait catnip, and The Promise was no exception. Starring Christian Bale, Oscar Isaac, and Charlotte Le Bon, this World War I-era film centered on the Armenian Genocide, one of the most harrowing and politically sensitive subjects of the 20th century. With its sweeping cinematography and tragic love triangle, it had all the elements of an awards contender. Unfortunately, it bombed spectacularly. The film's biggest hurdle was its execution. Instead of delivering a searing historical drama, The Promise drowned in cliches. Critics complained that it softened its subject matter by focusing too much on a fictional romance rather than the genocide itself. The attempt to blend tragic history with Hollywood melodrama left audiences cold. Despite a reported $90 million production budget, the film made only $12 million worldwide. That staggering shortfall marked it as one of the biggest flops of its year. Part of the failure came from difficult subject matter, but most of the blame landed on poor storytelling. Reviews described it as earnest but lifeless, a damning phrase for a film meant to honor victims of atrocity. The Academy ignored it almost completely, and the box office collapse ensured it faded quickly from public memory. The Promise is now remembered less as a tribute to history and more as an example of how Oscar bait can backfire when sincerity is wrapped in stale storytelling. The Good Shepherd, 2006. Robert De Niro's The Good Shepherd had all the makings of a prestige powerhouse. A sprawling CIA origin story starring Matt Damon, Angelina Jolie, Alec Baldwin, and De Niro himself. It was marketed as a serious, intelligent look at the birth of America's intelligence apparatus. With a $90 million budget and released during award season, the film was primed for glory. Instead, it became a lifeless slog. The biggest issue? It was boring. Clocking in at nearly 3 hours, the film buried itself in dry details and wooden performances. Damon's character, Edward Wilson, was deliberately emotionless, which might have been thematically accurate, but left audiences with nothing to hold on to. Instead of a gripping spy saga, viewers got endless muttering, gray cinematography, and painfully slow pacing. Critics were divided, with some praising its ambition, while many more dismissed it as dull and self-indulgent. For audiences, the verdict was clear. They stayed away in droves. Despite its enormous budget, The Good Shepherd earned only about $100 million worldwide, leaving little profit once marketing was factored in. Oscar hopes fizzled quickly. Aside from a single nomination for Best Art Direction, the film was shut out completely. De Niro's reputation as a director took a hit, and The Good Shepherd became shorthand for prestige flop. Rather than the definitive spy epic Hollywood wanted, the film ended up as an expensive exercise in patience testing. It was proof that Oscar bait can sometimes bore its audience into oblivion. Wonder Wheel, 2017. Woody Allen's Wonder Wheel had all the external trappings of awards bait: lush period detail, a cast led by Kate Winslet, and cinematography by the legendary Vittorio Storaro. Set in the 1950s Coney Island, It told the story of a frustrated housewife caught in a tangled web of romance and regret. The film was marketed as high art. The problem: audiences and critics found it dreary, stagey, and emotionally hollow. Winslet, in particular, was hyped for a potential Oscar nomination, but the performance was swallowed by Allen's heavy-handed writing. The film leaned too heavily on endless monologues, turning what should have been a visually rich drama into a theatrical bore. Even Storaro's vibrant lighting couldn't save it from being called pretentious and airless. To make matters worse, the film was released amid renewed controversy surrounding Allen, which torpedoed any awards hopes. Distributors barely promoted it, and audiences completely ignored it. With a budget around $25 million, it grossed less than $15 million worldwide. For a prestige project with star power, those numbers were catastrophic. By the end of award season, Wonder Wheel was forgotten, a casualty of weak storytelling and bad timing. Instead of being remembered as a serious drama, it became part of the long list of projects where prestige ambition completely overshadowed actual execution. The Majestic, 2001. Jim Carrey's career in the late 1990s was on fire, but by 2001, he wanted to prove he was more than just a comedy star. Enter The Majestic, a Frank Capra-inspired drama directed by Frank Darabont, best known for The Shawshank Redemption. Carrey played a Hollywood screenwriter, suffering from amnesia, who gets mistaken for a long-lost war hero in a small town. With its themes of patriotism, redemption, and standing up to McCarthyism, the film was clearly aiming for Oscars. But instead of inspiring audiences, it left them rolling their eyes. Critics called it saccharine, preachy, and far too long. Carrey's attempt at gravitas came across as forced, with reviewers noting that he seemed trapped between his natural comedic instincts and the movie's self-serious tone. Financially, it was a disaster. Made for around $72 million, it earned only $37 million worldwide, wiping out any hope of awards traction. The Academy ignored it completely, and Carrey's dramatic ambitions took a nosedive. Today, The Majestic is remembered as the textbook definition of Oscar bait gone wrong. It had the look, the tone, and the intentions, but none of the heart. For Carrey, it was proof that awards glory can't be forced, no matter how hard you lean into prestige formulas. Oscar bait can be a dangerous game. For every film that turns prestige packaging into golden trophies, there are dozens that crash, burn, and fade into obscurity. These 15 movies prove that audiences can spot forced gravitas from a mile away. So what do you think? Which of these disasters deserves the most pathetic Oscar bait crown? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's keep exposing Hollywood's biggest misfires together.